Hey everyone, back with Mindrolling. And this is a very special little group that we have. And I'm happy to welcome both Noah Markus and Joseph Goldstein. Joseph, Noah.
Yes.
We were just playing around before getting on live. And yeah, we're going to talk about this wonderful book. I bet a lot of people, Joseph, don't know about your poetry book.
Well, I think quite a few do because we've done IMS online anyway.
Right.
Programs, but I don't think it has the reach of this podcast.
But we were, Joseph, Noah said, well, it would be great if you did, read a couple of poems, it'd be wonderful. And that's when you said, well, no, it's a poet. It's I have a little bit of imposter syndrome going on. And Noah said, I can throw myself in that group easily. And of course, we all can. But so it led me to think about it. And I've told this story before, but it's if you haven't heard it, Joseph.
I haven't heard it.
Yeah, we'll see. So Krishna Das went to join Ram Dass at his swim, that he used to do every Monday in Maui. So he got there, and he sees Ram Dass in his car looking like sour, and very unusual for Ram Dass at all. So he went up to him and said, what's going on? And Ram Dass turned to him and said, we're all fake. I'm fake. You're fake. And Krishna Das's response, which was beautiful in the moment, but we're real fakes.
Right.
I love that. Okay, Noah.
Yeah, Joseph, just tell us, I don't know, how did this book of poetry come about? What was the impetus there?
Yeah. So I had kind of experimented a little bit, in writing poetry in my early 20s, with trying to express all the angst of those years. But then once I got into practice, for the last 50 years, I'd hardly written anything. But then about 5 years ago, I was in Spain with some friends on vacation. And one friend in particular, had been listening to the poetry of Ocean Vuong, kind of the young Vietnamese writer and poet who's quite up and coming. He's quite remarkable. I mean, he's a brilliant writer. And so when she was talking about him, we found some of his readings on YouTube, but just began listening to some of his poetry. And I don't exactly know what happened, but just by listening, maybe it was the surroundings of being in Spain or whatever, it just opened up this channel in my mind, and quite spontaneously kind of poems started coming out. And those first poems really were not very good, but my friends were so encouraging. They just, oh, this is great. You have to keep writing like that, and happily or not, I kind of believed them. So I kept writing, and so it was happening quite spontaneously. And then I came back to the States, and I have this one friend who's a very accomplished haiku poet. She's won all kinds of awards in this country and in Japan. And her haikus are really brilliant and wonderful.
What's her name, Joseph?
Sylvia Forge Ryan.
Okay.
Sylvia Forge
people
Ryan.
Can pick
and
up
she
on
has
that.
a book or two of her haiku out, and they're really remarkable. So I was showing her some of my early stuff, and she gave me just some great advice, which has served me really well in this whole endeavor. She said that most of the writing of poetry is in revision, and I had really been in rather this sophomoric idea of, whatever comes out at first is brilliant. So she really showed me that it's really about revision and crafting a poem. And I've come to enjoy that part of the process immensely. It's like cutting away or deleting everything that's extra. And so over these last 5 years, just when the muse strikes, so something will emerge. I'm not very prolific. So this is the book, and so that's 5 years worth.
I love that.
So it's in that sense that I feel like the imposter syndrome. So I started one poem, which I'm still kind of working on, but the first line is, "Real poets write every day." So I'm not, anyway.
Yeah,
so that's how it all began, and it's
cool.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful form of expression, and it so overlaps the meditative mind space.
Yeah,
which I think is what I love about it so much.
Yeah, I just when you said that about real poets, I was thinking about when I sit down to meditate and I have this ongoing discussion in my head: am I a real meditator? what the hell is that even? I'm meditating, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So what was that like for you, though? Sort of connecting to that place of creativity. It's something I felt like I used to have a deep connection to when I was younger, and as I've gotten older, I find myself having trouble connecting to that space in myself again. I'm just wondering if you can.
One of the things that I've really noticed, and this is about, in a way, the overlap of the creative process of writing, whether it's poetry or anything else, and meditating. For me, and I've seen this even before the poetry started happening, but just in my other writing, that I find that the mind is most creative the quieter it is, which is why, for now, even with the poetry, in the busyness of my life, the muse does not visit that often. But when I'm quiet, and I'm in a quiet space, that's what opens it up. And so at different stages of our lives, we're either more busy or less busy. But I think the quiet mind is, for me anyway, but I think it's probably true for many people, that a lot of creativity comes out of the silence, because then it's more intuitive rather than thinking through something,
Yeah.
And it's that overlap that's I really love. I can just be in a quiet space, and kind of a very ordinary perception of something or an ordinary experience takes on more meaning, because I'm not just rushing through it. I'm actually there in it, So I think that's all part of it.
Yeah. I guess for me, maybe getting into that quiet space is still just such a challenge a lot of the time. Even when I'm meditating, it's the voices in my head are still yelling at me. So,
well, so this would be a kind of an interesting experiment for you. Maybe not when you meditate, but just if you happen to be enjoying just a quiet time at home, with not distractions, but you're noticing all those voices in the mind, it would be interesting to write a poem about that, about that experience, because the environment of quiet, I think, could allow you to see that very clearly, and how you feel about it, and whatever perception about that experience is, to express that creatively. I think that would be fantastic.
Nice. Yeah.
So,
I'm going to try
so
that.
you don't have to wait for your mind to quiet down, but just have a quiet environment in which to tap into it in a different way rather than a judgmental way.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the key word, rather than an judgmental way.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what we kill ourselves on that, But,
Well,
thinking,
I don't know whether I shared with you at all my remedy for the judging mind.
no.
Okay. You may have heard this because it comes up a lot with meditators on retreat. One is not unique with the judging mind, whether it's judging oneself, judging others.
Mm.
So when people are on retreat and they're coming in and reporting that, oh my God, I'm just so much judging in my mind. So what I'll suggest to them very often is to spend one day counting the judgments. So every time they become aware, judging one, judging two, judging 598, judging 3,000. And what will happen is happened a little bit just now with you two. At a certain point, one just stops smiling because we see how ridiculous it is. But what's amazing, as soon as we can smile at the judgment, then they lose all their power. Because what feeds the judging is either we believe them or we have aversion to them and want to get rid of them. But that actually is strengthening them as well. So if we can change the attitude from either believing or condemning them and to just smile at the fact that it's happening, they really lose their power. Then it's just like a sound arising and passing in the mind. There's nothing much there. So why don't you just send me an email one day when you've counted your judgments? I'd be interested to know what number you get up to.
It's nonstop. It's never ending.
Well, I think one thing you'll see is that they're actually not nonstop. But anyway, do the experiment, and you'll see. You'll let me know if this.
Okay, that's
this
good.
works.
I mean, it's something I've worked on. I mean, because obviously it's something everybody needs to work on. And I probably got this from you. Just whenever it arises and I notice it, I just note it, right? Judging. But I've never.
But it's a little trickier than that because you could note it with a tone of judging.
Yeah.
So then that's really not being mindful of it.
No,
so that's why I say people often don't realize that aversion to something feeds it as much as wanting something, or desiring something. And that for me was just a really big understanding that with all the things that I didn't like that I saw coming up in myself, as long as I had aversion to it and judged myself for having it, it was just making it stronger. And then when I could just smile at the mind, then they're just empty thoughts, basically.
Yeah. That's Ram Dass is a good case for the way in which he related with these neurotic tendencies. And he would hang on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. He would say, when people said, well, Ram Dass, where are you now with all of the tendencies and so on, of neurotic tendencies, habitual patterns? He'd say, well, they're all still there. But, where they were big schmooze, they're little schmooze. and obviously not taking yourself so self-seriously and having a sense of humor. And that's what it reminded me when Joseph, when you said smile, you look at this and smile. I mean, that is probably so effective.
Yeah. There's one, I think there's one step even deeper than that, so not taking them so seriously and being able to smile, and then coming to the realization that they're not self in the first place. So that's the deeper understanding. Yeah, that these thoughts, they're just coming. They're not I, me, mine. They're just arising out of some conditioning or other. So to see the selfless nature of thought is really liberating.
But it's hard not to take it so personally, because you feel like it's coming from my mind, right? I'm attached to it.
Here's another little exercise. But this you would have to do when you're in a situation when you're meditating with other people. So you're sitting, other people are meditating, and all these thoughts are arising. So just imagine, as you become aware of the thoughts in the mind, that they're coming from the person next to you. So it's just a way, these are not mine. These belong to that guy. And it just, just kind of a little amusing shift of perspective can help release us from the belief, oh, these are mine.
Yeah.
Because they're just conditioned phenomena.
Yeah. And then, of course, you turn to the guy. Enough already.
Okay. While we're on this topic, I have one more little exercise with regard to thought, since this is such a prevalent experience for people, both in meditation and in their lives. And I'm sure we've talked about this because I talk about it a lot in the context of meditation. One of the most interesting questions to ask oneself when there are a lot of thoughts is to really look at the mind at that time, seeing the thoughts, and ask the question, what is a thought? Right? Not what is the thought saying, but just what is the thought as a phenomenon? And that's so amazing, because when we look at it directly in that way, there's hardly anything there. It's like little more than nothing. But we get entranced by the story. We get entranced by the content of it and miss its essentially empty nature. And just by asking that question with a sincere interest, okay, well, what actually is a thought as a phenomenon? And it's not hard to see that it's little more than nothing. We see how ephemeral they are. So that's a really liberating and it's a helpful way of freeing ourselves from this attachment or getting lost so often, in our thoughts, especially when they're not helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But how about, when we're talking about seeing all phenomena as selfless, and then we talk about knowing, seeing the knowing of the sense objects as selfless. And then we get into a little bit of a realm of difficulty in my mind, that knowing, right? What do we do with that?
Well, there is something to do with that. So the knowing, first let me say that different schools of Buddhism will talk about this in slightly different ways. So just, to understand that. But the knowing of sense experience, the consciousness itself, is selfless. That consciousness arises when the certain conditions are there. So I'll give you an example. And it's just is the classical Buddhist way of describing things. So they talk about, okay, what are the conditions for seeing consciousness to arise? We see a lot. And so we're knowing the objects of sight. But that knowing is itself a conditioned arising.
Yeah.
So then they explain, okay, well, what are the conditions for it to arise? And again, in this very classical Buddhist way, they talk of 4 conditions, that if those are there, seeing will arise. So one is the presence of light. If there's no light, you can't see anything. There has to be an object coming in front of the eyes. We can't see things behind our head. We have to have the organ of the eye in good order, working order. And there has to be the mental factor of attention. And so if the attention is not on the object that's coming in front of the eyes, if we're absorbed, for example, maybe in listening to something, and we're really absorbed in listening, something could pass by and we won't see it. So I find this, even though in a way it's a simplistic description of how seeing comes about, but it's very helpful. And it's easy to understand because obviously, if there's no light, we can't see. If any one of those conditions is there, seeing is not going to arise. And so sometimes I just like to do the experiment. I can be going for a walk and I'll just remind myself of this by asking the question, I'm going for a walk, I'm seeing, the trees and everything around. And I'll ask myself, well, if there were no eyes, would I be seeing this? No. If there were no light, would I be seeing? No. So it just becomes very immediately clear that seeing consciousness is a conditioned phenomena arising and passing away. And that gives a very direct understanding of its selfless nature. It's simply arising when the conditions are present. Conditions are not present, it's not there. So to me, this is quite a direct and relatively simple exploration of the selfless nature of knowing, of consciousness. And then there are others as well. And in other Buddhist traditions, one of the techniques, which I also use and like a lot, they'll suggest different ways for looking for the knowing. So, if, for example, sometimes I'll be sitting and hearing sounds, and then I'll ask myself the question, can I find what is knowing the sound? And then I look, the question is actually prompting a look at, okay, can I find what's knowing it? And there's nothing to find. And yet the knowing is happening. So in Dzogchen, Tibetan Dzogchen practice, this is the kind of exercise they do. And one of the great masters, Tokorgen, he would say, the not finding is the finding. That's what's to understand, that there's nothing to find. So again, that's approaching the selfless nature of knowing from another angle, that can't be found.
Yeah.
And yet the knowing is happening. So this is kind of the mystery of consciousness.
The mystery. It's so hard for the analytic mind to accept that, though, isn't it? It's
in what way?
Because my mind wants there to be an explanation for everything, right? And it wants there to be rhyme and reason to everything. And sometimes sitting with the mystery can be tough.
Yeah. Well, that's why I like that first example I gave of really understanding the conditions for consciousness to arise.
Right.
So that does give the reasons.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And so just different traditions will emphasize, more analytic ways of understanding, and some use other techniques for understanding. But I think the analytic understanding stands up to, or can lead to, genuine realization.
Very tough, though, in this age, would you not think? I mean, this is our back and forth with you, with Ram Dass, of course. Well, he used to absolutely, probably in front of you more than once, say that crystalline clarity of Buddhist thought is absolutely a huge trap because they're leaving out the heart, right? He would get into that.
Yeah, but I don't see that at all. And this is, of course, where and we had one discussion of this.
You and Ram Dass?
Yeah, I can't remember now exactly where, but anyway, it was some discussion of, to me, it's different language, not different experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, emptiness, which is a classical Buddhist term, is another word or another dimension of love. Because emptiness really means emptiness of self. And so, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who was, one of the great Dzogchen masters of the last century,
our favorite,
said something like, when you realize the selfless nature of phenomena, the empty nature, compassion arises spontaneously and effortlessly. And so I used to phrase it in that compassion or love or the heart space is the activity of emptiness.
That's great, too.
So I don't see any division at all. I don't divide it into mind and heart. I see it more, I would see it as self-centered or zero center. So when it's self-centered, it diminishes that heart quality. And when it's the zero center, it's the space for the manifestation of the heart quality. So next time you commune with Ram Dass, just remind him.
Yes. I speak to him every day. Absolutely. Noah?
Oh, yeah. All right, switch up a little bit. You were mentioning before we started this that you're about to go on to retreat for a few months, maybe.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's something I think about it this time of year anyway, because it's something so many people are going through. But dealing with loneliness, is that anything that sort of ever comes up for you while you're on retreat by yourself, or?
No. So I've had the idea for many years of writing a 2-paragraph book, which is called The Myth of Intimacy.
Oh?
And the myth is that you need another person to be intimate. To have the experience of intimacy, you need another person to be intimate with. That's the myth. Because my experience in meditation, and then as it manifests in life, when we're sitting, for example, meditating, and we are really just in the body, feeling the breath, that is a very intimate experience. We are really connected with the moment's experience. And this is true of being connected with any moment's experience, with a sight or a sound or a movement, or when we are fully embodied in the experience, that is real intimacy, because there's no separation. It's not two, it's one, right? And again, I may have mentioned this in previous podcasts, but early on, and when I was practicing in India with Munindraji, really, I think it was the first year I was there, we would be walking around the villages around Bodh Gaya, and he would say something that at the time I did not appreciate at all. I thought it was really hokey. He would say, "Oh, I am friend with the clouds. I am friends with the flowers. I am friends with this, friends with that." As I said, at the time, I was just, 23 years old or whatever, and I dismissed it. Over the years, I've really come to appreciate that, because when we are really present and connected to the moment's experience, it is very intimate. And so when I'm alone for a few months, the aloneness is just a space of solitude in which the intimacy with every moment is there, and it's full. So I just never feel lonely, because there's always something to be intimate with. And you mentioned the poetry earlier on. So there's one of the poems happened when I was on retreat last year or the year before. I was outside doing walking meditation, and I just heard a bird, I was singing. And just this haiku-like poem just came to my mind immediately. Bird song in the empty sky of my mind. And it reflected, usually our usual perception would be, okay, I'm here walking, the bird's in the sky, right? The song is coming from the bird, it's out there. But this was, the bird song in the empty sky of my mind. There was no separation. And so that's the kind of intimacy I'm talking about, which is potentially there in any moment. That we have that. Yeah, sorry.
We're good.
Yeah. So I think that just indicates the possibility for being alone and not lonely at all. In fact, that things feel richer. I'm getting calls. My phone is off, and anyway, I'll just keep declining every time it rings.
Yeah,
that's wonderful. The intimacy of the moment. I really I love that.
Yeah, and it's really genuine, because sometimes I marvel at myself, spending extended periods of time alone and never feel anything is lacking. Because there is that connection in the moment, and it's a beautiful space, and it's a poetic space.
Be here now is involved in that.
Be here now and all one as well, connecting to that space.
We were talking about imposter syndrome and a little bit of that, and let's talk about something that I think is very important for people to hang out in terms of looking inside, and that's around self-confidence And okay, what's that self that has confidence? We'll start there, of course. But in terms of the Dharma, the getting a little bit more skillful through practice is one thing. A little bit more wisdom. And then I just personally find the trust is such an important factor through which we can flourish. And many traditions talk about the honoring and the bringing in, respect, honoring, bringing in of ancestors. And in our case, particularly, you and I we met in India, and you speak, for instance, Munindra, and he was such a profound, incredible being, and Goenka, of course, and then on our side, of course, Neem Karoli Baba and Siddhima and so on. And that is important. To me, that brings to the fore a trust that, to me, that's what's really self-confidence is about. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. First, just to kind of clarify the apparent contradiction of self-confidence.
Yeah, right. Let's clarify that. Yeah.
I mean, it's simple. One doesn't really need to preface confidence with self. We could just say confidence.
Yeah, right.
and then it's an interesting exploration of, okay, what gives rise to confidence? Right? Mm. And I think what you're pointing to is really important. And especially in spiritual traditions, for most people, there are some exceptional outliers. But for most people, the importance of lineage, as you said, the spiritual ancestors, and to really feel that we're part of a long transmission of these wisdom teachings and the heart teachings. So that does give confidence, to our own expression of it, because we realize we're not just making it all up. So I think that is a key part. There are two other aspects that I felt to be really important. One is kind of appreciating what we actually do understand out of our own experience. So it's not only transmitting what we may have learned from our teachers, but it's also really appreciating that in the course of our practice, we actually do learn some things, right? And we know them. We know them from our own experience. Different ways the mind creates suffering, different ways we found of coming to some level of peace. So that reflecting on our own understanding and our own insight, I think also builds confidence, especially when it's in the context of a whole lineage. And then the third part, which comes out of, but also, I was going to say maybe supportive of the first two, which I feel is really important and sometimes overlooked, is humility about what we don't know. Because what we don't know is a lot more than what we do know. So, and to recognize that. So I think that humility about what we don't know actually enhances the confidence about what we do know from experience. So for me, these two really go together, confidence and humility. Because even, for example, in teaching, to have the confidence to share our experience, but also the confidence to say, I don't know. And that takes a certain kind of humility of just recognizing, sure, this there's a lot that's still beyond what I may understand, and so I think those two really work together in the context of, as you said in the beginning, being in a lineage of teachings.
And isn't it true, a little bit of respect for the mystery? We talked about the mystery a little bit ago. And instead of pushing away at it or longing or whatever emotional state that we might get into when even that word comes up in relation to reality, shall we say, I guess I think, who I think of when we talk about the mystery? Roshi Joan Halifax.
Mm-hmm.
She brings it up a lot, and she does it in a really reverent fashion. And I think that goes a long way when we're talking about confidence. Bringing that in, I think, really can support confidence and let us, as you say, smile at the lack of,
Yeah. And I think it's also to recognize that for different people, different language is going to resonate. And so for many people, and I was going to characterize a few groups, but I'm not sure they would be accurate. But I'll go out on a limb. So, I think part of the process of creativity and people who are engaged in creative expression, I think probably are more attuned to the mystery and to that language, because just the whole creative process is so mysterious.
Yeah.
But there are other people for whom that's not they don't resonate with that language at all. And kind of, as we were talking about earlier, just the more analytic approach, really want to understand, one might say, a more scientific way of understanding things rather than, I might say, artistic or whatever the non-scientific way is of understanding. But that's an equally legitimate language to use. So for me, that's the beauty of having so many different teachers and so many different expressions of the Dharma, because then people can really find the language, that resonates with them and that inspires them.
Yeah. This reminds of, you remember that book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance?
Oh, yeah.
Way back in our day?
Yeah.
Yeah, there were some references that are directly in that book about how there's, a certain sect of people that the way they relate to phenomena, etc., is get down and scientific and pull a motorcycle apart and put it back together. And other people come by and they just see the motorcycle.
Right.
And they go, wow. They merge.
Yeah. But also just, this is something that I've just been learning a little bit about recently. Which also, there's aspects of the scientific mindset taken deeply enough goes to the mystery. So I've been reading a little bit, and I heard an amazing lecture on quantum mechanics, quantum reality, and kind of the lecture was on kind of the history of the science that led up to that, and then the exploration and an explanation of really what that is. And the lecture was so clear that at the end of it, I had the illusion that I understood it. Because quantum reality really is mysterious. It's a whole other it's just a whole other level of understanding reality. So I think that on different levels, the two actually do merge.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, who was it, Joseph? You remember?
I just have a link to the talk, but I don't remember. It was some.
You know what?
Quantum.
Send us the link, and then we'll put it in the show notes, and people.
Yeah, I will.
I'm interested.
It was a brilliant talk.
Really.
So, one suggestion for you or anybody else who might end up listening to it. I think he must have had a time limit for his lecture because he was speaking really fast. Because he wanted to get all of this in.
Really?
So I would suggest listening to it on 3/4 speed, because the material is so you need time to kind of let it sink in. But he was...
Or a companion AI transcript might be good too.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's such a fascinating exploration of physical reality in just the most mysterious manifestation. It's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Actually, we talked about Duncan Trussell brought it up. We just did the retreat a couple of weeks ago in Maui, and Duncan and I and Jack, that got brought up a little bit. I can't exactly remember because he was talking too fast too, and I'm not sure he understood what he was saying.
I don't know who Duncan is.
Oh, Duncan Trussell. He's like a Pied Piper. 10 years ago, was brought this whole new generation to Ram Dass because he's got a powerful I can't believe he's not even reached out to you. He's got a very large podcast platform. He's a comedian, but he's a pretty smart dude. I don't know how the hell he got into quantum physics, but he did for that moment, right? Were you there? No, he did.
Yeah. No, he's into all kinds of fun stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you have one last Noah-ism here?
One last Noah-ism. I don't know. My Noah-isms might be a little long. One quick thing, and it doesn't have to be a lot. One thing coming up a lot for me these days is not just anger, but a feeling of righteous anger, which seems to give it a different flavor sometimes. Any thoughts or advice on processing that in a healthy manner? Not
well, the Buddha described it really well. He was talking about anger in general, but it really applies to that kind of self-righteous anger. He said anger with its poisoned source and honeyed tip. Because when we're angry, so I think the way of unpacking it, is to see that there's a certain quality that gives rise to the anger, which is the clear discernment of something. So for example, we see something and people can often feel that righteous anger with injustice or lots of things.
Yeah.
So that emotion is actually indicating, that this seeing of something, that needs to be addressed. The problem is that people don't parse out the discernment from the anger. Right? So the anger is kind of like the messenger to us. Okay, you're seeing something important, but then can we highlight the clarity of what we're seeing and then manifest our actions or our response from a more wholesome place? So it's not the poisoned root. Maybe it's the motivation of compassion. where we see an injustice, and the initial reaction might be at the anger, which is indicating, yeah, I'm seeing something clearly here. But then we drop the anger, which is not going to be productive, and use a more wholesome energy to respond.
Mm.
So dropping the anger does not mean not responding. It's just responding from a healthier place, from a more wholesome place, from a more effective place. So when you're feeling that, when you're feeling that righteous anger come up, it would be interesting just to ask yourself, oh, what am I seeing clearly here? Right? There's something which is prompting it. You're seeing something. And then, so the anger is indicating to you that you're seeing something. And then you could ask yourself, okay, well, what would be the most effective response? So you're separating those two aspects.
Yeah. Yeah, no, because it gets hard because there's almost something you like about that anger sometimes. It's that energy of it. Yeah.
Well, exactly. No, it's very seductive because generally when there's anger, people feel strong and empowered. But it has some damaging consequence. It's not a sustaining energy in our lives, right? And so we want to take the message of it, but then transmute the action and use a more wholesome, more nurturing, and more effective way of responding. So I think you can really transform that experience into something that's really valuable.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
It kind of brings to mind the way that we succumb to these habitual patterns, neurotic tendencies, or it's attaching to, then to change. It's extraordinary, no?
Yes. Just following up on that, sometimes I think one of the most important insights, both in meditation, but in life, and I think this is something people, perhaps without practice, don't really realize, that we have agency in what our minds are doing. We have a choice when we're aware, when we're mindful, and that's where the practice is so important. But I think many people think, oh, this is just how I am. This is my pattern. And don't realize, no, there's agency here. And the image I like to use, and I've experienced this a lot in my life, it's like having a TV remote and you're on a channel that's just a terrible program. Okay, click the remote, change the channel. So when we see a pattern that's causing suffering, it is possible to change the channel. And so we don't have to stay, kind of immersed in something that is just causing us and other people suffering. I don't know this time I could give a simple example of this, but we're running out of time.
Now the sponsor is going to grant us an extra 10.
So one time when I was going to Burma to practice with Sayadaw Pandita, a friend of mine had been there already for a few years in intensive practice. So when I went, and I was just going for a few months, when I went there and I saw him, it was like it was so clear, the depth of his practice, having been there for several years now. And at first my mind it was a real comparing mind. He's really doing well. My mind's still wandering. Whatever. Yeah. But then I saw what my mind was doing, and I changed channels to one of the 4 Brahma Viharas, like loving kindness and compassion And the third one is empathetic joy, where you take delight in the happiness of others. And so I just changed to that channel. And there's a whole meditation for doing it. Oh, may your happiness grow, may your happiness increase, whatever phrase it. And it's amazing. Just change the channel. And I went from a place of suffering, one kind, to a place of real happiness and joy in his happiness. And it was so simple, but one has to know that one can do that and have developed certain of the tools for what these other channels are, like a metta channel or a compassion channel or a generosity channel. They're all in there.
Right.
I fear that some of us have maybe lost the remote control. I don't know.
Well, the beauty of this is you can't lose it because it's in the nature of them. You just have to use it.
Exactly.
What's the expression? If you don't use it, you lose it. So use it.
And the beauty of our dear friend Sharon Salzberg, you can always go back.
Exactly. Begin again.
Begin again.
Yeah.
That's a great thing. A poem would be phenomenal, Joseph, to close it. Yeah.
So, this. I'm reading this particular poem because I was just with somebody yesterday who commented, much to my surprise, that he had read this poem and it really was very helpful for him, given what he was going through.
Great.
Which may not be apparent when I read the poem, but so the title of it is "Lazy Day at 76." Morning coffee and a first glimpse into the unknown day, waiting for that pulse of life to push through the pale joy of sitting doing nothing. Going for a walk is almost too much on this day of questionable ease. Is it simply resting up to save the world, or the faint glimmer of decline? I'll decide tomorrow if I awaken in the morning light. So in a way, that just goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Having a very ordinary experience of just sitting in that morning coffee, no energy, didn't want to do anything. And it could either have just been that kind of experience, but I happened to be in that poetic mind space. And so then I was using that experience to really express something. And anyway, to me, that's kind of the joy of poetry. It's extracting from ordinary experiences something meaningful in some way.
That's really great. By the way, everybody, the book is available, right? Amazon or something?
Through IMS.
Through IMS. It's not on Amazon?
I doubt it, because not that I know. The IMS.
Okay, Dreamscapes of the Mind, and we're going to give a link to IMS where you'll be able to find it.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's a few other books from Joseph that you may enjoy as well, which we'll list a couple of them. One major book that I, to this day, recommend is Joseph's mindfulness book. I mean, there's a lot of books about mindfulness. And this is, to me, just so profoundly focused in a way that really is helpful. And I'll tell last little story. Joseph came to retreat with Ram Dass and Maui and a bunch of us, and so he was going to do a session, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, what should I talk about?" I said, "Well, mindfulness." And he said, that book? He said, that book is like 700 or 800 pages, whatever it is. I said, well, it's be the abridged 101 version. He said, okay. Joseph, you probably don't even know. Maybe I've mentioned it, but we have it's a 75-minute piece that I called 75 Minutes to Enlightenment. The way that you characterized how to embody mindfulness is really extraordinary, and I thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
And everything else, Joseph. I really appreciate you being
just to edit what you said a little bit so as not to scare off people. It's only about 400 pages, not 700.
That's great.
Long enough.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Oh boy! Well, we wish you the best.
Thank you
for the retreat,
you, Joseph.
And for and thank you again, of course, for being here. I love our little talks here.
Yeah, it's always a delight, these conversations.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you. And everybody, this is Mindrolling on Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com. And of course, Joseph has a podcast there, which, it's endless of this incredible talks that you've given over many, many years, alongside of his brethren, Jack Kornfield and Sharon Salzberg and Ram Dass and others that you all are familiar with. So go there, and we will see you next week on Mindrolling. Bye-bye.